Hello from Arbor Low, a prehistoric monument in the Derbyshire part of the Peak District. Me, Rach, and my boyfriend, Steve.
Hello. Laugh when you introduce me.
Me, Rach, and my boyfriend, Steve.
Oh,
Hello. We're off for a walk up to the monument, but before we go, I'm just going to show anyone watching, probably my mum. I'm just going to show some information that's just in the car park about the site itself. It is situated on private land. You can just see the farm emerging through the fog up there. So there is a suggested route that they want you to stick to when you go to the site. So you start just down here, walk up through the farm, veering left, and then the henge and the stone circle itself will be on the left hand side. There is a burial mound a bit further up and to the right. I don't know how much of this we're going to see though, because the fog is pretty thick, but we're going to stick to the route. We're going to pay the £1 entry fee, do you think it is?
Yeah, for car parking, I think. Oh no, I think actually, yeah, £1 just regardless of whether you're walking.
Yeah, it's a £1 fee to get through the farm because you are walking on somebody's land.
And you park just before the green sign.
Yeah, so we've parked. Lots of place. We've parked there, and the car park extends just here. Oh my god, is that cool?
No. And we're only about 5 minutes off the main road.
Oh god, yeah.
So it's not far.
Not far at all. Off the A515?
A515?
Yep, the Ashbourne to Buxton section of the A515, so not too far. The track so far looks pretty uneven, pretty muddy. I mean, it's not raining, but it is wet. So we've got I've got walking boots
and I
on.
need to put some.
Ooh. Let's go.
People can see.
I need to put your lead on, stay.
Yeah, okay.
Wrong side. Fucking hell. Fucking hell.
So then I'll use hands.
You are. Welcome to Gates with Rach. I struggle to open these things.
It's only took 5 minutes. Right, Arbor Low is up there on the left through the gate.
Yeah, so we just stopped filming briefly.
Almost stepped in the car park.
Because we were walking through like the farmyard up at Oldham's farm, and they were sort of, well, the farmer was in the yard. Yeah, the farmer was in the yard, so didn't want him to be on film. And it is private land, so I didn't film the house, I didn't film the cars. We're in the field now, where the public have right of way to move to head on up to the monument. I think it's an agreement that's been struck with English Heritage and the farm owners to allow people access through the fields. We saw a little sign on the gate which asks people to keep their dogs on a lead, and that's because at times there will be livestock grazing in these fields. When we've been before, we had to walk through a load of sheep, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
Which I don't particularly like, but I made it. And as you saw earlier, Steve just stopped me from slamming my foot down into a cow pat. Bit of a wet one. So yeah, just be mindful of that when you're visiting with creatures on a lead. Right, so we've just walked up through the livestock field, and before you head through the gate, which takes you to the monument, which you can see just over there, there's this little interpretation panel which gives you a bit of information about the age of the site and its age in relation to other sites, so you might recognise that one there. So the interpretation panel helps you to orientate yourself around the site. Sort of says that we are here, this is the farm that we've just walked through, that was the track that we walked up, and there is the car park. So, I don't know, 5-minute walk maximum, depending on how fast or slow you go. It just reimagines what the site might have looked like at the time of it being built.
Is a raid going on?
Probably
All
not
those
right.
people?
Yeah. They're walking down the avenue through the causeways and into the thing. I don't know what I'm talking about here.
Into the thing.
I don't know what to say.
They're having fires, they're having a good time.
Showing how people might have used the space. This is just, you know, an artist's interpretation. This is based on some evidence that's been found here, you know, over the course of years. English Heritage love to label things as ritual sites when there's not really a clear use or a clear known use for things.
Yeah, it could have been Glastonbury, you know, for the olden times, for all we know.
Wow.
I mean,
it sort of looks like it.
It does.
It might well have been used for ritual purposes. We don't know what that ritual would have been. I know there's.
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm saying.
We'll just leave that up to interpretation.
Yeah.
I think.
It could have just been a place where people met.
Yeah.
You know, rather than being ritually symbolic. I don't think it was defensive, and I think a lot of people think this, because if you've got a defensive structure, the ditch would be on the outside of the, what's the word, bank?
Yeah.
Whereas the Henge Arbor Low has an exterior bank and an interior ditch.
That's weird.
Well, it's not very good for defensive purposes, but it sort of, I mean, if you just look up here, we actually can't see into the site itself. We know it's there, and if we were living at that time, perhaps we could hear things that were going on in there, but we wouldn't be sure what it was. So there is the suggestion that maybe people stood on the bank to look down into the stone circle and see what was going on, or maybe it was just
look high enough for a defensive hill.
Well, no, that as well.
It's just, and plus it's got two big holes on either end.
Yeah, exactly.
So
the
it's
causeways.
not, yeah.
We're going to head through this gate here with that English Heritage emblem just on there, standing out for us. Gives us a bit of information on what we can and can't do to the structure. Things like walking up the banks isn't allowed, you know, just to help preserve it for future generations. Anyway, shall we go and have a look and talk a bit more about the features
Yes, let's.
Awesome. Gates with Rach, part 2. Oh god. Can you hold this, please? Okay.
It's a miracle you can reach over the gates.
Yeah.
It's a miracle you can reach over the gates.
Thank you. Right, so we've just made it to the top of the hill, and we've reached our final destination.
Jesus. Oh, horror film.
I mean, maybe that's what this was for, you don't know.
Mm.
But yes, we're finally here, looking at a very, very foggy Arbor Low. Looks pretty atmospheric. Steal Steve's words there.
Mm-hmm.
I was a bit worried about filming in all this fog, but actually, I think it adds to the experience.
Yeah.
Looks pretty cool. Behind me, to my left, is one of the banks that I was talking about. So there are two banks, and those banks are sort of semicircular in shape, and they are, what's the word I'm looking for?
Banks?
Intersected. They are intersected by two causeways, which is this flat bit of grass that I was just standing on here. The causeway is actually easier to see when you've got two ditches either side of you, so maybe I'll go to that in a minute. So we're just walking over the causeway that I mentioned before. Internal ditch, external bank. I was reading through the 125 page long conservation plan last night. It's riveting stuff. But
some bloke's gonna watch this and he'll be like, I wrote that.
But I think it was when English Heritage had done some of their site analysis. They'd looked at the banks, and they would have originally been 3 metres high. So according to this conservation plan, which was written by English Heritage, the Peak District
You're dropping a beat. Peak District.
Think so, yeah. The Peak District National Park Authority, and some other people, I can't remember, but they wrote this conservation plan, and as part of that they analysed the banks, these two semicircular banks, which make up the Henge, and they would have originally been 3 metres tall. This is what they believe. At the moment you can see they're sort of up and down in height. On average they are just over 2 metres tall today. So they would have been a bit taller, but again, the point that Steve made earlier about this not being very good for defensive purposes is just shown in the height of the banks. So, yeah. They created the banks using the earth dug out of the ditch.
Mm-hmm.
We're just
That's what I
talking
just
about.
said.
Well, I didn't
Just stole it from them.
film you saying that, so I'm just going to flip the camera and just show you the mentioned earlier that I was standing on. It's kind of hard to see. I think it's harder to see on camera.
Yeah, you'll see it when it's on the big screen.
Yeah, but essentially where that left hand bank starts there, we start to dip down into a ditch just here. Likewise on the right side, where's my finger? There it is. There's a bank, the ditch starts just there, and then there's just this raised bit of grass here, and that is what's referred to as the causeway. There is another one just down there, which we can walk through and have a look at now.
Yeah, so look.
Awesome. So just slowing down here, this is the secondary causeway that heads off out of the Henge and back onto the field that we were just in. You've got your ditch there on the left and your ditch on the right, just obscured by these limestone slabs just here. It would be awesome to walk on top of these banks and get more of an aerial view of the site, but as I said, there was a note on the gate discouraging people.
Yeah, well, they don't want to ruin the site.
No.
Next to the banks, so.
Well, that's it. If you think about how many people, especially in the summer, not on a day like this, we're the only ones here, but especially in the summer, the erosion that is caused by people walking up and down. This is also has been used by livestock as well in the past. I don't think it's used anymore, but again, briefly skimming that conservation plan, they talked about the effects of livestock. I'm just going to spin this. You can just see, there you go, you can just see where people and their movements have worn into the top section of that bit of bank, and I think it would go all the way around, people walking. So yeah, we're going to be good, and we're going to stay in the middle of the circle and just appreciate it from this angle. So we've just had a little walk around the left-hand semicircle of stones. You can see the sort of the angle that they sit at, and it is believed that they weren't originally lying flat, they were actually erected and upright, like the stones at Stone Henge are. Yeah, the stones here didn't look quite as Tetris-like as the lintels at Stone Henge, but this would have still been incredibly impressive. You can just see the colour of these stones are limestone. They would have looked white. Well, they are white.
Yeah, it's moss, isn't it?
Well, that is like lichen growing on top, but when these rocks were originally cut, they would have stood out against the ground that we're standing on. I mean, perhaps this ground wasn't even turfed over. Perhaps it was just earth, or there was a bit of a trackway going through the centre, maybe, where people were using it. It is thought that the banks would have been without turf. So we're pretty high up at the moment, and we're on a limestone plateau. So if you imagine these banks without the turf on, they would have also looked as white as the rocks, and that would have stood out in the landscape. It would have looked like, I don't know, a very commanding monument, which could be seen for miles around.
Yeah, at the top of the hill as well, isn't it? So
yeah,
you could see it from far away, if it's not foggy.
Exactly, yes. Can't see much of it today. And I'm sure people back then had days just like this, just like we do. Right, going to head round to the other semicircle of stones now. Our little ganders. You can see where they've eroded, just quickly. That'll be a mixture of rain, ice thawing and melting, perhaps even damage. You don't know how old this damage is. I mean, that must have been a particularly soft part of the rock to get such a deep hole. The site is still used during the summer solstice by New Age druids, if that's the correct term, and I think people amass and gather and celebrate the solstice. They have the permission of English Heritage and Co to do that. So perhaps that also accounts for erosion of the site in general. we're back at the second causeway that I was talking about. So I've done a bit of a circle there. I think when I was researching this site there's about 50 stones. It doesn't look like it, but a lot of them are broken and have been damaged over time. That's a lot of stones to chop and lug here and erect as well. So a lot of manpower would have gone into making this, creating this special place. Again, not 100% sure what it was used for. But the stones that we haven't discussed are the ones in the centre just here. These are sort of referred to as the cove stones, and they do appear in other stone circle sites, bigger ones that are sort of more well known than this one. So Stone Henge, and also Avebury, which are down in the south. Not quite sure what these stones were used for, but they must have had some kind of significance and prominence to be placed in the centre of the circle here. They're pretty hefty, pretty large. Oh wow. And sometimes people leave offerings. There we are, they've left flowers as well, just down the crack there.
I guess it's people who think the site has some sort of either religious or magical sort of presence around.
And it's, you know, it'll be people that come to celebrate the solstice here. So yeah, sometimes you do find offerings here, and I think again in that conservation plan English Heritage said you will see that here. As long as people aren't digging down or destroying rocks to leave their offerings, then I think it's quite nice.
Yeah.
And it shows the continued use of the site even to this day. When you said it was giving you Blair Witch vibes,
Are you going to tell me off?
Naughty. Probably offended the only person watching this video. That does lead me on to another little ghost story that is associated with Arbor Low. Apparently, if you come here during the evening, so when darkness falls, you might encounter, not a hobbit, a boggart. You might encounter a boggart. Apparently one roams around the stones, and you could be caught off guard if you're here after hours. If you are familiar with Harry Potter and you remember Ridiculous, you should be okay. So watch out. So I'm just standing on this second causeway and looking over to the left. And I did reference this section of the bank earlier when I was talking about erosion. I did read, when I was trying to work out how old this site was, I did read that the henge was built in the late Neolithic period, sort of 2500 BC. I read that the stone circle came in about 500 years later, and that in the, well, between the late Neolithic and early Bronze Age, the site was still being used on and off, and a burial mound or barrow was actually built into one part of the henge. And I don't know this for sure, but just looking at this section over here, it is pretty wide and it looks a little bit different to the rest of the remaining bank. So I wonder if it's actually this section that's been built into at a later date. And it's interesting that people from a later time would still be using this site, and it does make you question why. For the importance of somewhere to carry through so many years is quite telling, but what does it tell us? That's the mystery. So we have come to the end of our wander around Arbor Low, Stone Circle and Henge. We've had a fantastic time. Been here for about an hour. I do fancy a cup of tea now, so we're going to head back to the car park and just drive a very short distance to Parsley Hay Cafe. It's less than 5 minutes and it's a good place to just get a brew and a sit down. Thank you so much for sticking with us till the end. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we'll see you again. The chainsaw now.
He doesn't want you to do this anymore. He's been watching and he's like,
Just
that's
get off
enough.
my land.
Yeah.